Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, the Senate approves the debt ceiling bill to be signed by President Biden and avoiding default. May's job numbers were released today. Did unemployment go down? And what will this mean for future Fed raising of interest rates? Former CEO and founder of Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, found guilty of defrauding investors, begins serving an 11-year sentence at a minimum security prison in Texas. And this week, Minnesota became the next state to legalize the use of marijuana. We'll be talking about the long-term effects of states legalizing cannabis stocks with Kevin Sabet. He's former White House drug advisor for 3 presidents in the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations. And today, it's National Donut Day with free donuts at Krispy Kreme and Dunkin' Donuts. Now, there's just only a few hours left, but please wait till after the show to get yours. I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories and more. So sit back, relax, and let's have 30 minutes together. It's Friday, and it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, and welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde for this Friday, June the 2nd. Well, the debt ceiling drama and the question of would the U.S. default on raising its borrowing capabilities was answered last night when the Senate voted to approve the House bill. Now it's just up to the president to sign. The administration said that they would not negotiate on raising the debt ceiling, but the new bill now includes returning unspent COVID money back to the Treasury, work requirements for single able-bodied food stamp or SNAP recipients without dependents, and the restarting of paying of student loans that was halted over 3 years ago because of COVID. Now, every month the student loan program was not being paid, the government was losing $5 billion a month. The government released May's jobs numbers, and Wall Street were the results because it showed the economy is slowing due to higher interest rates. Inflation is at just under 5% and still outpacing wages at 4.3% for May. Unemployment went up and was higher than expected for May. Unemployment is at 3.7%. The economy added just under 340,000 new jobs for the month, and hourly earnings for last year is up 4.3%. Last month, the healthcare sector added just over 52,000 jobs, followed by leisure and hospitality with 48,000. But manufacturing for May lost about 2,000 jobs, which may show a slowing of new construction. Well, how did our money do this week? All S&P 500 sectors ended positive for the day, and the Dow Jones turned positive for the year. It was the Nasdaq's 6th straight weekly gain, and the longest winning streak since January of 2020. And this week, the Dow Jones closed today, and it was up just over 2% for the week. The S&P 500, they closed just under 1.9% for the week, and the Nasdaq, they closed today just up over 2% for the week as well. Cannabis stocks, well, they're now being publicly traded. Many states are legalizing marijuana use. So will the cost of these changes, will we be paying a heavy price down the road? Tonight, we've got Dr. Kevin Sabet. He's former White House advisor to 3 administrations, and he's president of Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Hi, Kevin. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Thanks so much for having me, Andre. Appreciate it.
Kevin, I would bet, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I would think that if you asked a lot of people, do they think that marijuana should be either decriminalized or legal, you may get an answer that would be more favorable. But if you said to those same people, would they like their surgeon right before the operation smoking a joint with their OR nurse, or maybe their pilot smoking a joint with their co-pilot right before they're about to take a flight, you might get a whole different answer. Would I be right?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, there's so many misconceptions about the harmfulness of marijuana today. People have a view that's really outdated. It's from the 60s and 70s when it was basically quote unquote harmless plant that would put you to sleep. Today's marijuana has been genetically bred to be up to 99.9% THC, which is much stronger than it ever was. Woodstock Days was 3% or so. These are brand new products. They're the gummy bears, the cookies, the candies, the ice creams, the sodas, the tinctures, the concentrates. I mean, products we've never had before, the legalization that we've now had in some states. The legal market has innovated and brought us those products. So there's a lot of misconceptions. And if you talk to every major medical association, they would agree that we should discourage marijuana use, that it's not good for you in multiple reasons, and that the legalization is really about the commercialization of marijuana. It's about promoting it with for-profit companies who want to tell us that it's harmless. And so far, they're doing a very good job at that.
To my count, 22 states of the 50 that have legalized marijuana, and you've got a number of other states that have decriminalized marijuana as well too. And whenever I'm curious of what, how to decide something, I always think of follow the money. What type of money are we talking about? The lobbying to state legislatures to decriminalize this?
It's tens of millions of dollars. In fact, every single time the government has legalized marijuana through ballot referendum, we're talking a $3 to $7, maybe $8 million campaign in favor, and very, very little against, because parents and people whose interest it is to not have legal marijuana actually do not have the kind of money that the legal companies do. For them, it's an investment. Now, even though we're usually outspent, it doesn't mean we always lose. Arkansas, we were outspent $20 million to $1 million to $1 million, and we still won because basically people saw right through it. Oklahoma, North Dakota, South Dakota, people have been seeing right through it. I am grateful that President Biden remains against the legalization of marijuana.
What they're hoping on also is if the government legalizes or decriminalizes it, then that would be maybe a tacit approval. And then they could also then say, well, look, it must be okay because the government approves this type of usage.
Oh, absolutely. It's in the interest of the legal market to have legalization, this industry, because they want the government to say it's okay. They want the government to get some tax revenue. And remember, though, for every dollar in alcohol or tobacco taxes, we spend $10 to $20 in lost social costs. So it's not a win. And when you look at the car crashes, the increasing suicide risk by 5 times, schizophrenia, a third of schizophrenia in 19 to 29-year-old men is probably due to marijuana use disorder. That's an enormous number. These issues are very costly. So the government's not really making money from it, even if in the short term there are these revenues.
There was an interesting article, I think it was in a weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal just a couple of weeks ago. And I always had this thought, and I'll give you an analogy, but it's not far off from the truth. Let's say you have one company on one side of the street that sells marijuana and files their taxes with it, pays and does the regulations that are all involved. Then across the street, you have the black market that is not paying taxes on it and not following regulations. Well, you've got one side that's following the regulations and taxes, which means they've got to charge a higher price as compared to the other side that can undercut. Yeah. It's capitalism 101. That's right. Who are you going to buy from? So they found that states such as Washington State, California, and those that were being sold this bill of goods that were going to be making millions and millions of tax dollars, they're finding that they're coming out short.
Absolutely. The underground market, the illegal market, thrives under legalization because the demand skyrockets. The government can't keep up with those regulations. In fact, in places like New York and Illinois, they are like desperate to give licenses to people who have a conviction for marijuana in the past, and yet they're not even able to really do that successfully. So there's a booming underground market in states that have legalized marijuana.
I sometimes interchange the words decriminalizing from legalization. Is there a difference between those two terms?
There is a difference. So the decriminalization has really been the de facto policy in most U.S. states for the last 30 to 40 years. It basically means we're not criminalizing low-level possession. If you're an adult who smokes a joint in the privacy of their own home and does nothing else, no one's banging down your door. So in many ways, it is already decriminalized. And I don't think people should be going to prison. And thankfully, they're not for low level marijuana. I don't think they should be given criminal records. But there is a very big difference with the decriminalization and the legalization, the full legalization, which is really about the commercialization of marijuana. It's about how to make money. It's legalizing not only the demand, but the supply. And so that is a big difference. And unfortunately, a lot of politicians use this term interchangeably.
Tobacco and alcohol. We think, well, the tobacco has a narcotic, nicotine in it that makes it addictive. Alcohol, if you do too much of it, that also becomes addictive. But what I've been told, but pot is not addictive. Is pot addictive? Marijuana addictive?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, it is. We know that 1 in 3 people who used marijuana in the last year have a substance use disorder, have an addiction. That's good studies out of New York, Deborah Hassan and others putting that out. We also know that the percentage of marijuana users who have used in the last month that are actually using it every day and are very likely addicted to it, that percentage has skyrocketed over the years. It's almost 50% of people who have used it at least one time, they're actually using it every day. The number for alcohol has hovered around 10 to 12% over the last 40 years. So the number for alcohol has remained steady, but the number for marijuana has skyrocketed. It's become much more addictive than it ever was. And that's because of that potent product, the THC. Remember, like you said, tobacco was not killing people before the advent of big tobacco and the Industrial Revolution and cigarettes, and we put nicotine in cigarettes. Then it became deadly. My worry is that marijuana is now becoming deadly because we have commercialized and legitimized many of these companies whose business it is to get people addicted. They want lifelong customers, and just like the tobacco industry wants them. So they're taking really a page out of the playbook of big tobacco.
Who puts the THC inside marijuana?
Well, marijuana has naturally occurring THC in it. There are hundreds of ingredients in marijuana. THC is one of them. But we've learned to boost the THC through certain genetic breeding techniques, agricultural
That's what I was talking
techniques.
about. I meant you were talking about like from 5% in the 1960s
Right.
and 70s to right now 99%. That's what I was talking about.
Right.
I mean, how do you? Who
We've become much better at farming. I mean, we've become better agricultures, in agriculture. So we can really increase that THC level. We can really make sure that that's the dominant ingredient. And maybe even the other ingredients that take away the high aren't even there. So that's what we've been able to do. And that's what this industry does when they create these like vapes, these cartridges of concentrates that kids are using all the time. This stuff is really, really potent. It's very different than we've ever had in the past.
Would I be correct? I'll bet if you asked a lot of people what they're thought of as legalizing marijuana, you may get an answer, yes, no, but a certain percentage. But if you use the term medical marijuana in front of it as an adjective, okay, that word medical, would you get a different response, do you think?
Absolutely. And that's what the marijuana legalization industry and the lobbying groups, that's what they did 30 years ago. You're exactly right. What they did was, how can we make the word marijuana more palatable to the average American? Not the hippies that always liked it, but how could the average American? And they figured out the one way to do that is to put the word medical in front of it and then sort of bring out vulnerable people with cancer and HIV and other deadly diseases and say that they need it for that. And that was a brilliant and remarkable PR campaign. Now, interestingly, there are medicinal components in marijuana that have therapeutic value when delivered in the right way, ideally through the FDA and through FDA-approved products, are safe and effective for people. And we should promote that. I have no problem with that. But that is very different than saying that all marijuana use is medical, that these concentrates, these things you get at dispensaries where people don't really know what they're in. I mean, if you think you know what's in the pot you're getting from the dispensary, I have a bridge to sell you because you don't really know what you're getting. You don't have people that are experienced in medicine and pharmacy and pharmacology. And so you have these huge issues. And you put the word medical though in front of it, and it really is able to kind of tug on our heartstrings.
So if a politician would say, well, we're legalizing it, but now because it's legalized, you'll be able to see the ingredients that's in it, and now you can rest assured that exactly that's what's on it, what you're being ingested?
It is. That's not happening at all. In these places where they've legalized marijuana, the FDA has gone and other groups, media companies have gone and tested the actual marijuana that's being sold and the ingredients that are there. And they're often not comporting with that at all. This is federally illegal. I mean, I have to remind your viewers, this is an illegal drug. And so the idea that, what they're doing in states that people actually know what they're doing is wrong. They don't. So it's a huge, huge issue where people think they know what they're getting, but they really don't.
Many years ago, I was doing some research to try to get a better grasp of our talk. And I'm saying maybe about 20 years ago on C-SPAN, there was a show, and at the time, I think she was HHS Secretary, Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala. And she was on with, he was a former four-star general, but he was working
General Barry McCaffrey.
That's exactly right. Former four-star, but now he was working as drug czar with the Clinton administration. But Shalala said that there is scientific proof of the harmful effects of marijuana. Now, I'm curious, that was like 20 somewhat years ago. Have there been new research to contradict what she said, or is the lobbying so intense that they want to just shove that research under the rug?
It's the latter. I mean, if anything, the more research has proven Ms. Shalala to be true, even more so. We know much more about marijuana than we did. Actually, that was in basically the mid 90s.
Really?
And we mid to late 90s, right? Over maybe 20 now, it's hard to believe. I remember because I also worked for a little bit for Barry McCaffrey. He's a great guy. Yeah, so no, that was valid then. There was a lot of research showing the harmfulness. There's much more research now showing the harmfulness. We know now, for example, that marijuana can reduce IQ by 8 points. We didn't know that before. We know that it's involved in a third of schizophrenia cases of young men. We didn't know that before. We know that it quintuples your risk of suicide if a regular use. We didn't know that before. There's a lot we didn't know back in 1998, 1996 that has just confirmed those statements even more so. Unfortunately, the lobby is so intense that they give the impression that it's the opposite. That if you are sort of a progressive, forward-leaning person, forward-thinking person, that you must think marijuana is pretty harmless, and that if you think it's harmful, you have a view from 100 years ago. It's actually totally flipped around the other side completely.
At one time, there was what was called Schedule 1 drugs. And Schedule 1 was known as, let's say, ecstasy, heroin. And marijuana at one time was known as a Schedule 1 drug. Well, first off, is that still in existence, Schedule 1 drugs? And if so, is marijuana still classified as a Schedule 1?
Yeah, so we still have scheduling 1 through 5, and marijuana is still a Schedule 1 drug because it meets the criteria for a Schedule 1. It doesn't mean it's as harmful as heroin. That's what people don't understand. They think because marijuana and heroin are in the same category, it means we think it's as harmful. We don't. I mean, if you're caught with heroin on the federal level, it's much more of a, damaging from a jail point of view than a prison point of view than marijuana is. So we don't treat them the same, but they're both classified as Schedule 1 because they fall under that specific criteria, which are two things: high potential for abuse, which we know marijuana is, and no accepted current medical use, which is true because raw marijuana in all of its forms has not passed FDA muster at all. And we don't determine medicine or science by popular vote. Popular opinion is not science. Science is science. It's evidence. It's looking at the truth. And so marijuana is still under Schedule 1 because it falls under that criteria.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Jimmy Carter was the first president while in office that said that he believes in the decriminalization of marijuana. And of course, I mean, Bill Clinton, he smoked, but he never inhaled. You had Barack Obama, who wrote a book, and in his book, he wrote about his drug use and such. But I'm curious that, in life, we have pivotal moments. About 2008, 2009, at the time, the AG, the Attorney General Eric Holder, was giving a news conference, and some reporter asked him about the law of decriminalizing the smoking of pot. And I'm curious, I think there was what was called the Ogden Memo that came out later. What was that, and how much of a pivotal moment was it?
I love that how well you know your history. It's great. You don't get that often. You're very, very well informed on this. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So yes, So basically, Jimmy Carter did say that he didn't think that the penalties for marijuana should be worse than the actual drug itself. This is a time when marijuana was averaging 3% THC. The country's attitudes had shifted dramatically in favor of marijuana at that time. Um, just interestingly enough, so that movement of marijuana legalization, promotion, normalization was really, stopped in its tracks when the Reagan administration came on board. But interestingly, I met with Jimmy Carter maybe about 8 years ago, and he was very supportive of the work that we're doing at SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, the group I founded with Congressman Patrick Kennedy, because he saw that the commercialization was a really bad idea, and he went out of his way to tell me that he made a distinction between decriminalization and legalization. So anyway, very interesting, very thoughtful. He's been very thoughtful on that. But you're right. I mean, these are big changes. What happened in 2009 was that, you're right, Eric Holder was asked about what he thinks of medical marijuana. Is he going to enforce medical marijuana laws in states? And he basically said, "We'll get back to you. I don't have an answer for that. We'll get back to you." So what they did is put out a memo called, and I wrote about this in my book about, I'll never forget the day when it was released. I was working in government then. Called the Ogden Memo. We didn't think it was a really big deal because it was just codifying in a memo, not law, in a memo to U.S. attorneys what was already standard practice, even in the Bush administration, was that, we're not going to go after low-level people using marijuana for purported or not medical purposes. That's not the point of U.S. attorneys and federal law, which the Bush administration did not go after low-level people. So it wasn't saying much, but the media ran with it. And frankly, in a very smart fashion, the legalizers ran with it to say, aha, see, we got to change. This is great. We have a win. We're changing marijuana laws. And people got the impression that this was now a green light. So now, all of a sudden, booming in states like Montana and California, other states that had very small programs, huge booming medical marijuana industry where people just started, opening up these shops left and right, thinking that there was a full green light. Things got so bad that in 2011, actually, right before I left, the new the new Deputy Attorney General, Jim Cole, so David Ogden was gone, Jim Cole said, "Whoa, wait a minute, this is too much," and put out a memo actually saying, "We did not give you a green light." Like, it was actually a very stern memo. Unfortunately, the cat was already out of the bag at that point. People just thought the Obama administration was all in. And what certainly didn't help is in the second term, Jim Cole put out another memo saying, "We're not going to stop states that legalize marijuana. We're going to simply monitor what they do. We will enforce the law if they are going overboard in many ways, but we're not going to stop them." Unfortunately, that, made the legalization movement, that just gave them so much momentum when they got that new Cole memo. And unfortunately, neither the Obama nor the Trump nor the current Biden administration is really doing much enforcement at all on those provisions that were laid out in that memo. The Trump administration did overturn that memo, so you could argue that memo is not even in force anymore. But the cat was out of the bag there on the federal level.
States that have legalized, I mean, California, I'm thinking of Oregon, Colorado, Washington State. And as I'll use your term, once the cat's out of the bag, or is it too late now? Because I think anybody who's been in Washington State, California, and seen the needles in San Francisco, the drug abuse in Seattle, Manhattan, the streets of Manhattan, what's going to happen?
I think we can do a lot still. First of all, I think we can limit this marijuana industry. We can lower the THC levels. They shouldn't be allowed to sell 90% THC. We should have 10 to 15% levels at the very most. We can restrict advertising much more than we do. Many states allow billboards and mass advertising. We can clamp down on social media. We can have an evidence-based social media youth campaign. That's really what we need to show that, kids, that this is not good. We can have better drug laws with drug courts, with probation reform. There is actually a ton we can do if we have the will to do it. Our new organization, which is called the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions, which is at gooddrugpolicy.org, is putting out essentially a policy guide soon for lawmakers on what can be done, not just for marijuana, but all drugs, really.
What's the end game? Do you think the end game for many is just for the legalization of all drugs?
Oh, 100%. This industry is taking the playbook from marijuana, from tobacco, and they're applying it now to psychedelics. They're applying it to MDMA. They're applying it to all these other drugs, and they want to apply it to heroin eventually, to cocaine. So, absolutely, there is a part of this whole movement that really does want to see all drugs legal, and so that's obviously something we've called for a long time. That we know that that's what they're doing, and we're trying to warn people about it.
Is there THC in gummy bears, but also I think it's CBD oil? How harmful are
Yeah.
those areas?
Well, we're learning just now about CBD, but again, I would say buyer beware. We already know about liver damage, and that's not even long-term use. That's sort of medium-term use. So liver damage is a high probability. Often in CBD gummies and CBD products, there's a lot of THC in them. You just don't know it. So a lot of people have had panic attacks, psychotic breaks, even when they took what they thought were CBD gummies, but they really had THC in them. So that's a huge issue. The THC gummies, of course, they're basically infusing these gummy bears with THC. It's very kid friendly. That's why we've seen a huge spike in even young children, as young as 1, 2 years old, go to the ER because of that.
I hope you come back.
I'd love to come back. This was a lot of fun, Andre. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Hey, if you've got a question, maybe a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it pithy, and write us. And notice the new email address at andre@benecapital.com. So, let's take a look at the markets heading into next week. But first, it was on this day in 1987, President Ronald Reagan appointed what economic consultant to replace the retiring Paul Volcker as chairman of the Federal Reserve? We've got the answer, and it's coming up. Well, on this day in 1987, President Ronald Reagan appointed what economic consultant to replace the retiring Paul Volcker as chairman of the Federal Reserve? Alan Greenspan. So, let's have a wrap up on Wall Street. A once darling of Wall Street, charming investors, Wall Street analysts, and business editors with their company Theranos is now an inmate in a minimum security prison in Texas, sometimes referred to as Club Fed. Elizabeth Holmes surrendered this week to begin serving an 11-year sentence for 4 counts of defrauding investors of millions of dollars. In addition to the 11-year sentence, she's still on the hook to repay $450 million. While at the minimum security prison, she's going to be paid between 12 cents to 40 cents per day. And with Tesla stock rallying, Elon Musk is once again back at the top as the richest person in the world. According to Bloomberg, Musk's fortune is now estimated to be $192 billion. Well, give or take a billion. Now, an idea to the size of the fortune, he can spend $52 million every day for 10 years straight, and he still has more to spend. Now, by the way, in that we included weekends and leap years. Well, that's a wrap up on Wall Street Wrap Up. Next week, with Memorial Day now over and summer here, where will gas prices be heading? We're going to be finding out to expect gas prices for these summer months and for the rest of the year with Bank of America's head of global commodities, Francisco Blanch. That's next week. And that's our show for this Friday, June the 2nd. Our thanks so much to Kevin Sabet for being our guest this evening, but always we appreciate you for allowing us into your homes tonight. So have a fun weekend with the ones you love. I'll see you next week. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap Up. I'm Andre Laborde. Remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Wall Street Wrap Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.